In August 1553, Mary Tudor, the eldest daughter of King Henry VIII, arrived in London to assert her claim to the English throne. The people greeted her with great celebration, recognizing her as the rightful heir to the crown. However, although her entry into the capital was marked by joy and triumph, her reign would soon take a dark turn and become infamous in English history. Mary's ascension to the throne followed a turbulent period in England's monarchy. She had spent much of her early life as a royal princess, but the political turmoil surrounding her father's break from the Catholic Church and his subsequent marriages had deeply affected her. After the death of her half-brother, Edward VI, and the brief reign of Lady Jane Grey, Mary seized the opportunity to become queen. Despite her initial popularity, Mary's reign became overshadowed by her relentless pursuit of religious reforms. A devout Catholic, she sought to restore Catholicism in England after her father, Henry VIII, had broken from the Church of Rome. Her actions, including the execution of over 280 Protestant reformers, earned her the notorious nickname Bloody Mary. These religious persecutions sparked widespread fear and resistance, contributing to a lasting division between Catholics and Protestants in England. While Mary's reign was marked by her desire to restore England's Catholic roots, her actions ultimately alienated many of her subjects and created a legacy of religious conflict. Her reign, though brief, would forever be remembered for the brutality of the burnings at the stake and the failure of her religious policies. Born in 1516 to King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, Mary Tudor was their only surviving child. As the firstborn, she was seen as the rightful heir to the English throne, but her position was uncertain due to her gender. In the 16th century, England had never been ruled by a female monarch, and the idea of a woman ascending the throne was not widely accepted. Thus, while Mary had a legitimate claim, it was often overshadowed by the prevailing belief that a male heir would be a more suitable ruler. From a young age, Mary was groomed for a royal marriage to strengthen England's alliances. Her parents, particularly her mother, Catherine, hoped to secure a strong political union by marrying Mary to a powerful prince. At just 2 years old, Mary was betrothed to the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne, in a ceremony meant to solidify the ties between England and France. This was the first of several engagements over the years, all aimed at securing Mary's future as a queen through marriage. Despite these royal plans, her claim to the throne remained in flux due to the political upheavals surrounding her father, Henry VIII. The king's break with the Catholic Church and his 6 marriages left Mary's status uncertain. Her mother, Catherine, was initially married to Henry VIII and was the rightful queen consort, but the divorce and Henry's subsequent marriages caused a fracture in the royal family. Mary was forced to endure the humiliation of being declared illegitimate when her father annulled his marriage to her mother. Although her future seemed uncertain, Mary remained a significant figure in English politics. Her determination and faith ultimately led her to claim the throne, even in the face of great opposition. Throughout her early years, Mary Tudor's marriage prospects were a central aspect of England's diplomatic strategy. As the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, she was seen as a valuable asset in securing powerful alliances through marriage. To strengthen England's political position, Mary was betrothed to several European princes over the years. One of her earliest engagements, at the age of just 2, was to the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne. This marriage arrangement was intended to solidify ties between England and France. However, this was only the first of many royal suitors Mary was connected to, and her marriage negotiations played a significant role in her father's efforts to expand England's influence on the European stage. Beyond her marriage prospects, Mary was also carefully educated and trained for leadership, despite the societal expectations that women were not meant to rule. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was determined that Mary should receive a proper education, one that would prepare her for the possibility of ruling in her own right. Catherine ensured that Mary was well-versed in subjects like Latin, history, and governance, teaching her the skills necessary to manage a kingdom. This education was a rare opportunity for a woman of her time, as most women were generally expected to focus on domestic duties and were not trained for political leadership. Mary's training and education were pivotal as she navigated the turbulent politics of her era. Despite the traditional limitations placed on women, she was raised with a strong sense of duty and responsibility, fully aware of her potential to rule. Her education, combined with her royal bloodline, would later help her in her claim to the throne and her efforts to restore Catholicism to England. Henry VIII's decision to divorce Catherine of Aragon and Mary and Boleyn had profound consequences for his daughter, Mary. As a result of her father's divorce and subsequent marriage, Mary was declared illegitimate, as her parents' marriage was no longer recognized by the king. This declaration stripped Mary of her royal title and her rightful place in the line of succession. It was a bitter humiliation for the young princess, who had once been the sole heir to the throne of England. Mary's new status as a bastard caused her considerable distress, as she was no longer seen as the legitimate daughter of the king. Her position at court became precarious, and she was forced into a life of servitude to her half-sister, Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry and Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth, who was raised as the new royal heir, had everything that Mary had once enjoyed: the title of princess and the favor of the king. Meanwhile, Mary was relegated to the role of a servant, living under Elizabeth's household with no power or dignity. The treatment she endured during this time was cruel. Mary was humiliated by being forced to serve her half-sister and was treated with contempt by many of the courtiers. Her father, Henry VIII, who had once been so proud of her, abandoned her and refused to support her. The emotional toll was immense, as Mary had to endure public scorn and private heartache. This period of hardship and degradation would have a lasting effect on Mary, shaping her personality and fueling her desire for revenge against those who had wronged her. Her suffering during this time played a significant role in her later decisions as Queen of England. After the execution of Anne Boleyn, Mary sought to reconcile with her father, Henry VIII, in hopes of regaining some of her lost status. However, this reconciliation came at a heavy price. Mary was forced to acknowledge Henry's religious authority, particularly his break from the Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England. Although this move allowed her to restore her place at court, it came with the cost of publicly accepting her father's religious reforms, which went against her own Catholic beliefs. Under the reign of her Protestant half-brother, Edward VI, Mary found herself in a difficult position. Edward, who was a strong supporter of Protestantism, implemented further religious reforms that contradicted Mary's devout Catholic faith. As Edward's religious policies took hold, Mary became a vocal opponent of the Protestant changes. She resisted the shifts in religious practices and doctrines, refusing to accept the new Protestant order that was being established in England. Her resistance was not just a personal stance. It turned her into a symbol of Catholic opposition against the Protestant reforms. Mary's steadfast adherence to Catholicism made her a target of Protestant critics, but it also solidified her position among Catholics who saw her as a defender of their faith. Her opposition to the religious changes under Edward VI would play a key role in her later actions as queen. When she finally ascended to the throne, Mary would attempt to reverse the Protestant reforms and restore Catholicism to England, seeking to undo much of the religious transformation that had taken place during her brother's reign. This ongoing religious struggle was central to Mary's reign and shaped her legacy as Bloody Mary in history. After the death of her half-brother Edward VI in 1553, Mary Tudor seized the opportunity to claim the throne. Edward's death left a power vacuum, and Lady Jane Grey, who had been declared queen by some of Edward's supporters, was quickly seen as a rival. However, Mary managed to rally significant support from both the nobility and the common people, quickly gaining enough backing to challenge Jane's brief reign. Mary's forces successfully defeated Jane's supporters, and she ascended to the throne, becoming Queen Mary I of England. Upon becoming queen, Mary focused on restoring Catholicism to England, which had been severely undermined during her father's and brother's reigns. One of her first acts was to declare her parents' marriage between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon as legitimate, reversing her father's annulment that had declared their marriage invalid. By doing so, she not only restored her own legitimacy in the eyes of Catholics, but also signaled her intent to reverse the religious changes introduced by her father and brother. Mary's decision to reinstate Catholicism was a significant move, especially considering the strong Protestant presence in England at the time. Her efforts to restore the Catholic faith were met with opposition, but she remained determined to undo the Protestant reforms and re-establish papal authority in England. This marked the beginning of a turbulent period in English history, known for the religious conflicts that would dominate her reign. Unfortunately, her attempt to restore Catholicism would also lead to the infamous persecution of Protestants, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary due to the numerous executions of heresy. Despite her best efforts, Mary's reign became one of intense religious division and set the stage for further conflict in England's future. In 1554, Mary I of England married Philip II of Spain, believing that the union was divinely ordained and would strengthen both her rule and England's position in Europe. The marriage, however, was deeply unpopular with many English subjects, who feared that it would lead to England becoming too closely aligned with Spain and potentially lose its sovereignty. Furthermore, the prospect of a foreign king ruling alongside her alienated much of the English populace, who were already uneasy about her Catholic restoration. The marriage sparked significant opposition, which culminated in Wyatt's rebellion in early 1554. Led by Sir Thomas Wyatt, the rebellion aimed to overthrow Mary's marriage to Philip and prevent Spain from gaining influence in England. The rebels were motivated by a mix of political and religious reasons, fearing the return of Catholicism and a loss of English independence. Wyatt's forces marched toward London, and for a time, the rebellion appeared to have the potential to succeed. However, Mary's determination and swift action allowed her to maintain control. She managed to rally her loyal supporters and decisively crush the rebellion, demonstrating her resolve and ability to suppress dissent. After the rebellion was put down, Wyatt and many of his followers were executed, and the attempt to overthrow her reign was definitively quelled. Despite successfully quelling the rebellion, the marriage to Philip remained unpopular, and it did little to endear Mary to her subjects. Philip's influence was largely limited, and the marriage itself did not produce the hoped-for heir, further diminishing Mary's legacy. The combination of a contentious foreign alliance and religious tensions would contribute to the struggles of Mary's reign, shaping her place in English history. Determined to restore Catholicism to England, Mary I took decisive and controversial steps to suppress Protestantism. One of her most infamous actions was the execution of Protestant heretics, a series of burnings that came to be known as the Marian persecutions. Mary believed that these executions were necessary to purify England and return the country to the true faith, but they were deeply unpopular and alienated many of her subjects. The burnings were not only seen as brutal but also as a stark reminder of the religious divide that had torn England apart since her father, Henry VIII, broke from the Catholic Church. Among the most notable victims of these persecutions was Thomas Cranmer, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, who had been a key figure in the English Reformation. Although Cranmer had initially recanted his Protestant beliefs under pressure, his eventual refusal to deny his earlier convictions led to his execution by burning in 1556. His death was particularly significant because it symbolized the failure of Mary's efforts to fully stamp out Protestantism. Despite Cranmer's recantation, the execution intensified opposition to her rule and led to widespread condemnation of her religious policies. The burnings sparked outrage, particularly among the Protestant community, and were a catalyst for rebellion and dissent. The execution of figures like Cranmer only further entrenched resistance to her reign and became a rallying cry for those opposed to her Catholic restoration. While Mary remained resolute in her efforts, the violence of the Marian persecutions ultimately contributed to her unpopularity and the growing Protestant sentiment in England, which would later come to full fruition under her successor, Elizabeth I. Mary I, desperate for an heir to solidify her Catholic restoration, believed that she was pregnant in 1555. This led to a period of great anticipation, as many hoped that a royal heir would help secure her reign and bring stability to England. However, it is widely believed that Mary's pregnancy was actually a phantom pregnancy, or perhaps the result of a serious illness. Despite her physical symptoms, There was no child, and Mary's hopes of producing an heir were dashed. This emotional setback further deepened her frustration and sense of failure as a monarch. One of the major sources of tension during Mary's reign was her strained relationship with her half-sister, Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Mary could never fully accept that Elizabeth was the rightful heir to the throne. In her mind, Elizabeth was a symbol of the Protestant faction that had undermined her mother's marriage to Henry VIII and had led to her own humiliation. As a result, Mary refused to recognize Elizabeth as her legitimate successor, even though Elizabeth was the next in line by law and custom. This animosity was a product of the intense personal and religious conflicts between them, as well as Mary's belief in her divine right to rule and restore Catholicism. Mary's inability to produce an heir and her refusal to accept Elizabeth's legitimacy created a lingering instability in her reign. Her reign, marked by religious persecution and an increasingly unpopular marriage to Philip II of Spain, only became more complicated as she clung to the belief that she could bring about the restoration of Catholicism. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's survival and eventual rise to the throne in 1558 ensured the triumph of Protestantism and the end of Mary's hopes for a Catholic England. Mary I passed away in 1558 at the age of 42, likely due to ovarian cancer or possibly influenza. Her death marked the end of her troubled reign, and with it, the collapse of her hopes to restore Catholicism in England. The lack of a male heir, coupled with her failure to overcome the Protestant establishment, left England in a state of uncertainty for the future. Mary's inability to produce an heir significantly impacted her legacy, and her reign would be remembered for its religious turmoil and the burning of Protestant heretics during the Marian persecutions. After her death, Mary was succeeded by her half-sister, Elizabeth I, whose reign would prove to be one of the most prosperous and stable in English history. Elizabeth's rule, which ushered in a period of religious and political stability, overshadowed that of her sister Mary. Under Elizabeth, England solidified its Protestant identity, and the country prospered both economically and politically, achieving a level of influence on the global stage that Mary could never have dreamed of. Mary's burial alongside Elizabeth at Westminster Abbey was symbolic in its own way, as it represented the unity of the two sisters in death despite the deep political and religious divides that existed between them during their lifetimes. While Elizabeth's reign would be remembered for triumph and glory, Mary's legacy would always be tainted by the failure of her rule and the harsh religious policies that defined it. Though history has often cast Mary as a figure of religious persecution and failure, it's important to acknowledge the challenges she faced during her reign, from her difficult marriage to Philip II to the deeply entrenched Protestant opposition. Ultimately, her reign was overshadowed by Elizabeth's, but MaryI's impact on English history is still remembered as a complex and tragic chapter in the country's past.